There is a tension you have probably never been able to fully name for anyone, because it has no clear object that allows for an objective conversation. It is the persistent feeling that your life was made for something greater than what you are currently able to see. It is not arrogance, it is not superficial dissatisfaction with what you have. It is a perception that comes from within, which does not depend on external validation to exist, and which persists even on days when everything around you seems to contradict it. You look at where you are, the present circumstances, the visible limitations, the space between what you feel you are and what your current reality seems to confirm, and the distance between the 2 points sometimes seems too great to be real, too great to be anything other than an ego that has not conformed or a hope that did not know how to die. But today I am going to show you that this tension is not an illusion. It is not a denial of reality. It is the most concrete sign that there is something being built within you and through you that your current perception does not yet fully reach, and that the distance between what you feel and what you see is not proof that the former is wrong, but that the latter has not yet arrived where it is going to arrive. This is bigger than you think, and by the end of this video, you will have not only the emotional conviction of this, you will have the intellectual, theological, and practical structure to inhabit this reality in a way that changes how you act from today forward. Stay with me until the end. Let us begin with something that research on purpose and calling has discovered in recent decades, and which will give what you are feeling a foundation that goes beyond spirituality. The Gallup Institute, which has tracked human behavior and well-being on a global scale for decades, conducted extensive studies on what they termed a sense of calling, the perception that the work a person does or the life they live is connected to something larger than personal satisfaction or financial return.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who were tired of living in the fog. Ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.
The data is consistent and counterintuitive. People who operate with a sense of calling exhibit significantly higher levels of persistence in the face of adversity, the capacity to endure difficult conditions without abandoning the path, and recovery after failure than people who operate from exclusively intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. The explanation researchers found is specific. When a person believes that what they are doing serves something beyond themselves, the cost of the journey is redefined. The obstacle ceases to be a sign of error and becomes part of the process of something that has a larger logic. The difficulty does not decrease, but what it means changes. IPEA, the Institute for Applied Economic Research, in studies on subjective well-being and engagement in adult Brazilian populations, identified that the most robust predictor of long-term resilience in adults over 35, above income, education, or family support, is what researchers termed a prosocial orientation of purpose, the perception that one's own life is somehow connected to the good of others, that what is lived and what is built has an impact that overflows the limits of the individual. In other words, the feeling that your life is bigger than yourself is not self-deception. It is the internal navigation system of a being that was constituted to impact beyond itself, and which, when it loses contact with this dimension, also loses the capacity to sustain the journey with the firmness it demands. Researchers at the University of Oxford, in studies on meaning and mental health in adults in life transitions, exactly the age group and existential moment that most of you are going through, documented that the element that most distinguished adults who navigated periods of rupture and uncertainty with preserved psychological health was the ability to maintain what researchers called a horizon of meaning, a perspective that goes beyond the immediate present, which anchors the current difficulty in a larger arc, that does not depend on the circumstances of the moment to continue existing. The tension you feel between what is and what you were made to be is not the problem. It is the horizon of meaning operating. It is the sign that you have not lost contact with the larger dimension of your existence, even in the moments when everything around you tried to convince you that this dimension was not real. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, subscribe now. Because this week has been a construction, each episode added a layer to what we are consolidating today, and what comes after this will presuppose what you are receiving in this closing. Now I need to take you to the biblical root of what we are discussing, because no intellectual structure reaches what the scriptures reveal about the nature of the calling that transcends the immediate understanding of the one who receives it. The calling of Abraham is recorded in the 12th chapter of Genesis with a brevity that hides a depth that took Hebrew commentators centuries to begin to explore adequately. The text simply says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you." In Hebrew, the instruction to leave is lesh lecha, LKHA, and this construction, seemingly simple, is one of the densest in all of Hebrew biblical literature. The verb lech means go, movement, departure, displacement. But the lecha, the added reflexive form, is not simply an intensifier. Medieval Hebrew rabbis, especially Rashi, identified in this lecha something that most translations into Portuguese and English lose completely: go for yourself. Or, in some interpretations, go for your own good, for your benefit. Go toward who you are called to be. Lech lecha is not just an instruction for geographical movement, it is an instruction for identity movement. God is not just saying to Abraham, change your address. He is saying, walk toward who you really are. And the land that will be shown, note, it was not told before Abraham departed, is the destination that is only revealed in the process of movement, not before. During. Abraham departed without a destination map. The text of Hebrews 11 verse 8 is explicit. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Without knowing where he was going. Obedience to the call did not wait for the clarity of the destination. The clarity of the destination emerged from the obedience to the movement. And what God promised Abraham at that moment, that in him all the families of the earth would be blessed, was a promise of impact that he would never see fully realized in his generation. Abraham died in chapter 25 of Genesis. The promise of being the father of many nations was still at the beginning of its fulfillment. What was built through Abraham's life overflowed the limits of his personal history, to such an extent that 2 millennia later, it still operates in the 3 monotheistic traditions that recognize him as a spiritual father, which together represent more than half of the human population alive today. Abraham did not understand the scale of what was being built through him. He simply went. When he was called to go, he went, and everything else revealed itself in the process. You have been called to your own lech lecha, to a destination that has not yet been fully revealed, to an impact that probably exceeds what you can imagine now, not out of vanity, but because what God builds through surrendered lives has a scale that the human mind does not reach in advance. And the requirement is not that you see the complete destination before you move. The requirement is that you move in the direction of who you were called to be, trusting that the destination reveals itself on the journey. There is a Hebrew word that is at the heart of Abraham's response to his calling, and which most translations reduce to a single concept that does not capture its original richness. The word is emunah, in Hebrew, eemvanah. It appears in the book of Habakkuk in the fundamental verse that Paul would quote in Romans and Galatians as the foundation of his theology of justification: the righteous shall live by his emunah. Our Bibles translate emunah as faith. But emunah is not faith in the cognitive sense of an intellectual belief. It is not simply mental assent to the existence of God or the truth of a doctrine. Hebrew lexicographers describe emunah from its root aman, which is the same root as our amen. And aman describes stability, firmness, reliability, the quality of something that sustains without yielding, that remains consistent regardless of external conditions. Abraham's emunah was not the intensity of the feeling of faith, which varied, which fluctuated, which generated Ishmael when the waiting seemed too long. It was the pattern of return. Emunah is the rope that, when you distance yourself, pulls you back into alignment with what is real and true about you and about what was promised. Not the absence of doubt, but the consistency of direction despite the doubt. And here is what research confirms about emunah, even without using that word. The Federal University of Ceará, in studies on psychological protection factors in Brazilian adults who went through significant existential crises, identified that the most protective element was not the intensity of religious belief, measured by frequency of practices or declaration of faith, but what researchers called consistency of life orientation, the ability to maintain a fundamental direction even when external conditions and internal emotional states varied significantly. In other words, the emunah that the scriptures describe as the foundation of the calling is also what psychology identifies as the most protective factor of the human journey. Not the intensity of faith at a given moment, but the consistency of the return to what is true about who you are and where you are going. Like this video now, because what we are building here deserves to remain on your timeline, and each like helps this message reach more people who are on the same journey as you. Now a second biblical figure, whose positioning in the larger arc of history reveals something about what is happening in your life that you cannot yet fully see. Ruth was a Moabite woman, a foreigner, a widow without resources, without a safety net in a country that was not her own, who made a seemingly irrational decision to follow her mother-in-law Naomi back to Bethlehem after the death of her husband, refusing the option to return to her family of origin in Moab. The phrase she addresses to Naomi in the second chapter is one of the best known in Scripture. "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." There was nothing rationally advantageous about this decision. Bethlehem was devastated by famine and loss. Naomi had explicitly said she had nothing more to offer, and Ruth was a foreigner, which in the context of Israel during the period of the Judges meant almost guaranteed marginalization. And so Ruth went to work in the field, gleaning the remains of the grain that the reapers left at the edges of the property, which Israelite law reserved for the poor and foreigners. A woman who could have chosen to return to the relative comfort of her family of origin was bent over in a field under the sun, collecting what was left over. The text does not record that she complained. It does not record that she felt that this was beneath what she deserved. She went and worked with consistency, emunah in the most concrete form possible. And it happened that the field where she went belonged to Boaz. And Boaz was a relative of Elimelech, Naomi's deceased husband, and he was the kinsman redeemer, the Goel in Hebrew, who, according to Israelite law, had the responsibility and the right to rescue the properties and care for the widows of the family. What happened next results in Ruth marrying Boaz, having a son named Obed, who had a son named Jesse, who had a son named David, from whose lineage the Messiah would come. The woman who was bent over in a field collecting grain scraps was being positioned in one of the lines of greatest impact in entire human history without having any idea of any of this. Ruth's faithfulness in the small, in the invisible, in the work that no one passing by would find worthy of historical record, was exactly what placed her in the right place, at the right time, so that what was supposed to happen could happen. What you are doing now, what seems small, what seems short of what you should be living, what has no witnesses or apparent record, may be the equivalent of Boaz's field. Not because any field is automatically the right field, but because emunah, the consistency of presence and character in the place where you are, is what creates the conditions for what needs to happen to find its way to you. You do not need to know the name of your Boaz before you go to work in the field. In the comments below, write the word enviado sent. It is a declaration of position that you are committed not only to receiving what this week delivered, but to leaving here as someone who recognizes having been formed for something that goes beyond themselves. Write enviado. But there is a third figure from this week who needs to close this episode. And he is the one who will speak most directly to the hearts of most of you who are over 35 years old. His name is Caleb. In the book of Joshua, chapter 14, Caleb, who is now 85 years old, presents himself before Joshua and makes a claim that is one of the most extraordinary in Scripture. I am 85 years old today. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country. This hill country, the region of Hebron inhabited by the Anakites, the giants who 45 years earlier, when Caleb was one of the 12 spies sent to Canaan, had terrified the 10 other spies to the point of making the entire nation retreat. The same giants whose size had made the other spies feel like grasshoppers. Caleb had spent 45 years waiting for the inheritance that had been promised to him at the moment when, unlike the other 10 spies, he brought a report of faith. 45 years wandering in the desert, not through his own fault, but through the disobedience of the nation, and then accompanying the conquest of Canaan under Joshua. 45 years of formation that was not planned by him, that was not requested by him, that came as a consequence of a faithfulness that should have been rewarded much earlier. And Caleb at 85 did not arrive asking for a quiet place to rest after so much time waiting. He arrived asking for the most difficult mountain, the mountain where the greatest obstacles were. Because 45 years of formation had not exhausted his vision. They had solidified his certainty that what had been promised was true, and that he had everything he needed to claim it. What your waiting built in you is not accumulated resentment of lost time. It is the solidity of one who has already been tested enough to know that what is at stake does not yield under pressure. And the inheritance that was promised to you is not going to be claimed by a younger and more inexperienced version of your life. It is going to be claimed exactly by who you became through the process that you did not choose, but that you traversed. Now I need to deliver to you the Greek concept that unites everything that was built this week, and that will be the ground under your feet from today forward. In the first chapter of Philippians verse 6, Paul writes something that our Bibles generally translate as, "He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion." But the Greek word used for complete is teleo, and it carries a precision that the translation complete does not entirely capture. Teleo comes from telos, which in Greek is not simply the chronological end of something, but the end as purpose, the point toward which something was being directed from the beginning, the realization of the function for which something was constituted. A hammer that never hit a nail has not reached its telos, regardless of how much time it spent existing. A seed that never germinated has not reached its telos, regardless of how long it stayed in the soil. Teleu is the verb of arriving at purpose, of the realization of what was present in potential from the beginning, but which required a process to become manifest. And Paul uses this verb to describe what God does with the work he began in you. Not that God will eventually, at some indeterminate moment, finish what he did in you in the sense of ending it, but that he will lead what he initiated to its telos, to the point of complete realization of the purpose for which you were constituted. The process you went through this week, that you have been going through for months, perhaps years, is not the end of your story. It is the process of teleu. It is the work in progress being led to its telos. And the fact that you do not yet see the arrival point is not evidence that it does not exist. It is evidence that you are still in the process of getting there. The Federal Council of Psychology, in reports on identity development in Brazilian adults in midlife, documents something that resonates deeply with what teleu describes. Adults who go through what psychologists call individuation, the process of becoming more completely oneself, of integrating the dimensions of one's own personality that were suppressed or undeveloped, frequently experience in the years following this process a level of efficacy and impact that had no parallel in previous decades, not because they became younger, because they became more whole, more completely the person they always were in potential. Telheu is not an age-related destination. It is a destination of wholeness, and it has no expiration date. It has conditions for development, and you are in those conditions now. Activate the notification bell now, because what comes after this week will continue to build on what was established here, and each episode from here on will presuppose the ground that these 7 days created under your feet. Now, what this is bigger than you think means in the practice of your life from today forward. The first practical change is in the way you read your own journey. You stop reading your story as a series of trials and errors, and you start reading it as a process of Telheu. The errors remain errors, the losses remain losses, but they are contained in a larger arc that was not interrupted by them, which, as we saw in this week's episodes, worked with their material in the same way that God's Chashav worked with what was used against Joseph. The second practical change is in the way you evaluate what is in your hands now. Ruth's field did not seem to be the place where a story of historical impact was being woven. Joseph's prison did not seem to be the place where the second most powerful in Egypt was being formed. Moses' desert did not seem to be the university of the liberator of a nation. The appearance of the place where you are does not determine what is being built in it. What determines it is Emuna, the consistency of presence and character that you bring to the place where you are. The third practical change is in the way you act in the face of what seems too big for you. Caleb asked for the most difficult mountain at 85, not despite 45 years of formation, but because of them. What you went through did not qualify you for the easy. It qualified you exactly for what seemed impossible before the process, and the claim you have the right to make, the inheritance that was promised, the call that was deposited, the impact that was prepared, is not smaller because of the time it took. It is more solid, because it was forged in the process that it required. The fourth practical change, and this is the one that has the most immediate effect on your daily life, is to begin acting from the awareness that your life affects people you do not yet know. Not as an abstract statement, as an operational principle. Every choice you make based on integrity has a radius of impact that you cannot measure. Every time you act from who you were called to be, instead of from what immediate circumstances seem to justify, you are being Ruth in the field. You are being faithful in the invisible, in the way that positions the visible that is to come. Gallup's research on what distinguishes people with a sense of calling from people without it found something that seems simple but has profound implications. People with a sense of calling act differently when no one is looking. Not because they are morally superior, but because the motivation is not in the audience. It is in the awareness that what is being built transcends any immediate audience. You were formed to act like this, and this week was in part the recovery of that awareness that the noise of life gradually buried. Before I leave you, I need to consolidate what was built this week in a way that will serve as a map for what comes next. On Monday, you received the revelation that the strength you always sought outside was being forged inside you, and that what seemed like weakness was the material of the gibber, the excellence of character that emerges through pressure. On Thursday, you received the structure to understand that the body and the spirit do not operate in separate departments, and that genuine renewal is always embodied, requires integral care, and has effects that begin in the invisible and reach the visible. On Friday, you entered your Tamion, the most protected inner space, and found there God's yada about you, the knowledge prior to all the external voices that defined you in ways that were not your own. On Saturday, you saw how what tried to destroy your life was redirected by the Chashav, the same artisanal intelligence applied to the same material, with an opposite purpose, and how the Shamar operated in the moments when you had no way of perceiving it. On Sunday, you understood that the renewal your face needs begins at the right address, in the processing of the chronic load that accumulated stress built up, and that Rapha and Anakainu do not return you to what you were, but lead you to what you have not yet been. And today you are receiving the context that contains everything else. This is bigger than you think. Your story is connected to an arc that overflows the limits of your personal life. The Lech Lecha that was pronounced over you points to a destination that only reveals itself in movement. The Emuna you cultivated, even without knowing you were cultivating it, is the rope that kept you on the path when everything else gave way. And the Teliu that is underway will not stop until what was initiated reaches the point for which it was constituted. You are not at the end of anything. You are at the beginning of what the entire process was building. Now I want to ask you for something that goes beyond liking, commenting, or activating the bell. I want to ask you to take the word enviado, sent, as an identity position for the coming days, not as a feeling, as an awareness. Sent means commissioned, positioned with intention, placed in a specific spot for a purpose that goes beyond what you can see now. Every day that you wake up and act from the awareness that you were sent, that the place where you are has a reason you cannot always articulate, that the people around you are there for something that goes beyond coincidence, that what you do with integrity when no one is looking is being woven into a pattern you do not yet see complete. You are being Abraham who went without a map. You are being Ruth who went to the field. You are being Caleb who asked for the mountain. Share this video with someone who is in the middle of a process that cannot make sense yet. Someone who is feeling the tension between what is and what they feel they were made to be, and who needs to hear that this tension is not an illusion, that it has a name, that it has biblical and scientific anchors, and that it is being led by an intelligence that neither slumbers nor sleeps. Sometimes someone's Lech Lecha begins when you decide that the message that reached you has a destination beyond you. We will see each other next week, and what you will find there will make sense in a way that would not be possible without what was built here.
Attention, you need to prepare now. I put together an exclusive resource for those who feel set apart for something greater, but live surrounded by noise, distractions, and mental overload. This is a 30-day journey that will transform your life, a guided path to armor your mind and prepare for what's coming, with daily practices of focus, boundaries, and discipline. Stop negotiating with the noise. Learn to spot distractions before they control you and strengthen your mind. Also available in an immersive audio version. Over 10,000 readers have already transformed their lives through the 30-day journey. Thousands of people have already started this transformation. People like you who were tired of living in the fog, ordinary people who decided to stop accepting mental chaos. Take advantage of this limited time offer only this month. Access your link just below in the pinned comment.